Hey friends, it's Vicky. Welcome back. So today we are going to be talking about some good old fashion history. So grab your learning glasses, put them on, and let's go. You ready for some learning today? I don't think I've really ever mentioned this on here. I mean, perhaps you've guessed it from some of my videos, but I don't think I've really talked about it. I am immensely passionate about Mexican American, and Chicano culture and history, in addition to vintage style. Aside from the fact that I am Mexican American, I also have some sort of degree in Chicano studies. I say some sort because primarily my degree is in communication. I studied communication at USC, but before that, when I was at community college, I took so many Chicano studies classes just because I was so passionate about it. And at one point, the department heads were like, hey, I think we need to give you like a degree because the requirement for this is like 5 classes or so, and you've taken like 11 and you meet all the requirements. I don't know if it's like an associate or something, but anyways, my point is that I'm so passionate about it and I want to talk more about that on here. I want to bring more of those stories this year and weave them into fashion history, beauty, maybe like some sewing, like I have done a little bit. I mean, it's just a really big part of who I am. It's part of my family. My grandpa was a part of the Chicano movement. He protested alongside Cesar Chavez, even went to jail with him. So it's a really big part of who I am. And I think I need to start talking about that more. And I think that there's a need for that content. So this year, my goal is to bring more content that tells a story of Latino voices when it comes to like vintage style and vintage history. So I hope you guys are in for that. And so today specifically, I want to go over the fashion history of Pachuco and Pachuca fashion. Yeah, so the first half of this video, I'll be talking about that. And then in the second half, I want to try some of the styles from the Pachucas in the 1940s. So doing a little hairstyle and trying a couple outfits that would resemble the styles from that era. So a little smarts in history and a little fashion show at lunch. Fashion show at lunch. If you are not familiar, what is Pachuco fashion? It is a Mexican-American subculture that emerged in Los Angeles in the early 40s around World War II. It consisted specifically of young Mexican-American men and women who dressed in very dapper, some would even say flamboyant outfits, and specifically the Zoot suits. So like if you've ever seen The Mask with Jim Carrey and he's wearing that big old flamboyant yellow outfit when he turns into his green, the Mask character, yeah, basically that's it, except not yellow, and instead of him, Mexicans. And so the suit suits, and yes, like suits were a part of it, but there were also other styles, which I will get into in a little bit. The suits essentially consisted of big, poofy pants that the dudes and the gals would wear as well, paired with long, loose jackets and also sole shoes. So they were very fancy. And then sometimes also they would put on pork pie hats and deck some really long gold chains. Yeah, they were out there. The big poofy pants were also, but not always, pegged at the legs. So it was like they kind of came out and then they were all tight at the ankles. So it was a very specific style, but again, not all did that. And so that's really what mainly categorized it. These big, loose wool outfits. They were known as the encapuchados or encapuchadas, which is like translation for suited, but kind of slang in Spanish. Slang was a big part of their culture as well. This type of style, even though it was owned and turned into its own thing by young Mexican Americans, was borrowed and did come from jazz and black culture as well. So like the likes of Cab Calloway. So like jazz, the jazz scene music was also a very big part for Pachucos. I need to put these glasses down because I'm just like, I talk a lot with my hands and they're all over the place. I should just put them on. Oh wow, I feel instantly smarter. Overall, it was considered a significant form of expression for these youth, especially during a time when, like our African American friends, they were experiencing social economic inequality, racism, segregation, and all of these like things that just made them feel like they didn't belong. So creating this culture and this style was kind of like their way of saying, this is my identity and like I am from here and this is my own thing. It wasn't an easy time for Mexican Americans. It still isn't. A lot of the times they were experiencing a series of hate crimes as well, horrible things, violence, not being allowed into certain establishments, criticized by the US and criticized by Mexico too. A lot of times that's why we have subcultures emerge, because we don't belong somewhere, so we create our own thing. So yeah, basically the reason for the Pachuco culture, or one of the main reasons, is because these youth were looking for some place to belong, something that held them together and gave them an identity that made them feel good about themselves. In order to give you a little bit more insight into this fashion history and the meaning behind it, I gotta take you back a little bit, rewind. When it comes to immigration, the US in this country, there's always just been tensions behind it. Nothing new, really. So in the 1920s, we had a lot of Mexicans here working in the fields. Some immigrated from Mexico, you know, our next door neighbors, and others were already here because the border crossed them, you know. It's like one day this was their home, Mexico, and the next day it was like, oh, this is the US, but my house is still here, so like, what do I do? Anyways, so there was a ton of Mexicans working here in the 1920s, and then all of a sudden the US, especially during the Great Depression, was like, hey y'all, like we can't have you here, we need these jobs, we need you to get out and go back to your country. So that's what they did. They kicked them out. A lot of Mexicans moved back to Mexico. Actually, Mexican Americans that were born here were deported back to Mexico, even though they were technically US citizens. And then in the 1940s, when World War II broke out and there was a shortage of laborers because everybody was out, you know, fighting the war, the US was like, you know what? We actually need you back here. Somebody needs to come pick these tomatoes and lettuce and things. So why don't you just come back? Just don't tell anyone. It was a whole love-hate relationship. And so this wave of bringing Mexican workers during the 1940s was known as the Bracero program, where like Mexicans were brought here to live temporarily. They lived and were paid under horrible conditions, by the way, but I will not get into that, just like it's still today. Fun fact, actually, my grandpa was a part of this program when he was just 15 years old. He would come in the train, he would ride the train from Mexico to the US, a wee little teen baby, 15 years old, and he would tell us about how he would eat the beets in the train because there was nothing else to eat, like rotting food that was left over. But maybe I can go more into stories some other time. So why am I telling you all of this? Why does it matter when it comes to Pachuco fashion? Well, because it made for a generation of Mexican Americans that grew up in a country with a lot of tensions, a country where they were not really welcome, even though a lot were born here during the 1920s and 30s. And because of the constant back and forth and like, you know, true Mexicans living here going back and forth, even though they stayed here, it was a lot of movement, and they didn't grow up with a full like on Mexican culture. A lot of these people did not speak perfect Spanish, or they spoke very broken Spanish. And so not only did it make for the US not accepting them and having hostility towards them, but Mexicans being like, you're not even Mexican enough, like you're not good enough. You know, that whole neither from here nor there, stuck between this dichotomy. I don't belong anywhere, I am within this limbo. And a lot of us still feel like this today. It's been a problem that's existed for years, but it's nothing new, really. You know, you had to be the Mexican that spoke the perfect Spanish and adhered to those cultural standards. We have a lot of them, a lot of expectations, especially on the woman. And then, I mean, what culture doesn't? And you also had to be that good old American who spoke perfect English and fit those norms and cultures, and aside to like having to look a certain way. And if you spoke Spanish, America penalized you. It's true, look it up. I like how the puppies just flow in and out of my videos all the time. It's like we take turns. So yeah, I mean, this problem still exists today, especially when it comes to language. It's one of the big things. I mean, I get it, I still get it. When I go to Mexico, I have relatives that look at me funny if I say something the wrong way or with a certain accent. And here, I mean, I get stuff too because I mispronounce words. I mean, I mispronounce a lot of words, I know that. And yeah, maybe because I'm dumb, but also my first language was Spanish. So a lot of times I'll get comments here sometimes they're like, you said this wrong, or it's not said like this actually. Don't get me wrong, I'm always up for learning and bettering myself, but sometimes it's just like, it's like Selena's dad puts it in the movie Selena. I don't mean to keep bringing her up, but that movie is perfection. Yeah, like Selena's dad puts it in the movie.
Being Mexican American is tough. Anglos, jump all over you if you don't speak English perfectly. Mexicans jump all over you if you don't speak Spanish perfectly. We got to be twice as perfect as anybody else. Our family has been here for centuries, and yet they treat us as if we just swam across the Rio Grande. You got to know about Frank Sinatra and Agustin Lara. And we got to prove to the Mexicans how Mexican we are, and we got to prove to the Americans how American we are. We got to be more Mexican than the Mexicans and more American than the Americans, both at the same time. It's exhausting.
So the US and Mexicans from Mexico saw this style as a hooligan style. It was not good. If you dressed this way, you were essentially seen as a gangster. And so yes, while most Mexican Americans that were gangsters dressed in Pachuco style, not all Pachucos were gangsters, but they were labeled this way. For the women specifically who dressed Pachuca style and Catrina, which is also kind of a style from Pachuco, but more feminine, they were seen as rebellious, indecent women. They were on the street, in public with their boyfriends, you know, who does that? When in fact, they were just doing what women in the 1920s did and what later on women in the 60s and 70s did, you know, leading those female empowerment movements. So I think it'd be accurate to say that these women were also revolutionary for their times. It was very silly to say that Pachucos and Pachucas were gangsters. It'd be like saying that all flappers in the 1920s were gangsters, or everybody that's a skater is a vandal. Some Pachucos and Pachucas really just liked the style. They felt cool, fly as hell, but the US didn't see it this way, and the media went to town with it. And in fact, during World War II, in a time when a lot of things were being rationed, including stuff like fabric, wearing these big puffy outfits that had, like, you know, tailcoats that hanged and whatnot was seen as unpatriotic. It's like, yo, we're trying to save things and you're over here showing off. It was seen so unpatriotic that it was even banned to dress this way. And so Mexican Americans were labeled as like traitors, unpatriotic, didn't care about their country, which was a lie. Mexican Americans and Mexicans served in World War II as well. In fact, we had over 500,000 Mexican Americans go into World War II. And one unfortunate incident specifically made things a lot worse and caused a media frenzy was the 1942 case of the Sleepy Lagoon incident, where after a Pachuco party, this young man who was also Mexican American was murdered. It just made things so much worse, especially in a time when tensions were already high because of World War II. You know, people were worried about feeling safe in their own home, and they're like, we have all these crazy hooligan Pachucos out there causing even more trouble here. It did not help. And then in 1943, we had what was known as the Zoot riots, and that's when things got at its worst, the most bad. Zoot riots were a massive hate crime that went on for a few days. So on June 3rd, 1943, this Navy ship arrived to Los Angeles from World War II. And while some Navy men were stationed here, there was a group of them, they accused some young men, Mexican American men, of taunting them and making fun of them. So they were like, you know what? We're gonna take care of them. We're gonna beat them up and put them in their place. The Navy men went after anybody that was dressed in this style, actually any Mexican American primarily. They even went after some African Americans and white kids too, beating indiscriminately, but especially Mexican Americans within the suits. They were chasing some of these young men into their homes, taking them out, beating them up on the streets, ripping their clothes off, their zoot suits off, leaving them naked on the streets and burning their outfits. In the end, the military police did have to interfere. The Navy men were sent back to their ships. They're like, everybody just calm down, let's go, this never happened. And the Mexican Americans, a lot of them were arrested and put in jail for their own safety. So that is essentially, in a nutshell, the history of Pachuco fashion and why it is so significant for us Mexican Americans and Chicano history, Chicano historians. In fact, a lot of Latinos still dressed this way today. You know, they're especially prominent in the lowrider community. A lot of vintage ladies that like to dress this way. And you may have even seen on BuzzFeed this like little video that gives a quick overview of Pachuca fashion with these two ladies right here, right there. And actually, fun fact, the lady to the right, I actually know her. Her name is SB. I don't know if she knows me, but we grew up going to the same youth group in high school. She has always been into vintage style, and I always thought that her style was cute as heck, and she was like one of the people early on that inspired me and that got me really interested in vintage fashion. She's pretty cool. You may have seen this. So I'm gonna try some styles similar to what you see here and the Pachucas from that era, but I want to do my hair first. So I'm gonna try a traditional ish. Let's see how this turns out. Pachuca hairstyle, and then I'll try out 2 outfits. The entacuchada, which was a suit, and then the Catrina, which is a more female, feminine, considered the bad girl look. Pachuca hair was big, and I mean like literally big, like in terms of volume, especially up here at the front. They did that pompadour a lot, so I'm gonna try to go for something similar, kind of like what SB has going on with the flower here. Actually, I've been doing that for a few looks now, and some of y'all have asked, so here you go. It may not be the perfect Pachuca style, but whatever. So I did set my hair, and I'm just gonna take these out real quick. So after I took my curls down, I took my hair from the front and parted it to the side. Just a small section, not a perfect part or anything. And if you want to do this at the middle or part it to the other side, you can. And then once I had my part sectioned off, I took my hair rat and rolled it all up. So rolled it upwards. And then once I had the hair rat in place, I just pinned it in with bobby pins on each side towards the side. So I wanted this to be like a little lopsided, like I said, to the side instead of perfectly down the middle. And I made sure to curve the hair rat so that it sat at the top or the side, like in a U shape. And then once that's done, I took one of my favorite centerpieces, these flowers here, and pinned them to the center of my hair rat. You know, it looks like you have a pretty little pot just sitting at the top of your head. And then after that, I just comb each side, add a little pomade, and pin in place. And you're done. Now time for the styles. And that is it. This is my overview of Pachuco and Pachuca fashion history. I hope if you've never heard about Pachuco fashion or have heard just a little bit of it, you've learned something today and you had fun watching me chit chat about the history of it. A little new and different to my usual vintage content, but I hope, like I said in the beginning, to bring you guys more stuff like this that speaks about other people's stories and experiences and how it relates to vintage fashion and history and whatnot. If you have any recommendations or anything you'd like to see or hear me talk about, leave them down below. If you like this video, you know the drill. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already for more content like this one. I hope that everyone's doing all right. Everyone is feeling okay. Remember that I love you. As always, sending you the biggest virtual hug in the world, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.
Don't tell mama, I'm gonna go to jail, tell papa, I'm